And now Anab Jain. She is a designer, filmmaker, futurist, together with Jon Ardern, founder of the fabulous studio Superflux in London. And she is a professor for industrial design at the University of Applied Arts here, and heading the studio for design investigations. Anna, please.
Going to take a minute, but thank you, Rector Bast, for inviting me. I'm sorry I'm speaking in English. I do understand quite a bit of German, but I'm not going to attempt to try and speak any, because, yeah, it's a long way to go before I get there. So I'm going to try and talk about AI, artificial intelligence. Everyone's talking about it. Where do we go from here? Nearly every day we see trends like this. I mean, the rector talked about the growing uncertainty and complexity and the technological acceleration, but these trends seem to be sort of getting manifest, not just hardware robots, but software jobs too. Recently, there is a declaration being created in Toronto for algorithms to respect human rights. This was apparently the world's first AI presenter unveiled in China. So it's a simulation, but apparently it's going to read the news for us in the future. On the other hand, I don't know how many of you have heard of DeepMind. DeepMind is a big organization which has now been for a while taken over by Google, but essentially they are creating artificial intelligence that does not need to learn from found data or collecting data anymore, but it can start learning from first principles. So it can start like tabula rasa, like an organism, it can start to learn from scratch. And what does this mean if we were to imagine such systems becoming more ubiquitous? What does it mean to live with such machines? And of course, while those are the kind of headlines you see in our everyday lives, we are constantly interacting with artificial intelligence, with things like this camera. It's so small, and it's called Google Clip. And essentially, it just takes photos on its own. If you're doing something with your kids or your family or it's just there, it's intelligent enough to know that you might want a photograph to be taken at that point, and it just takes those photos for you. So how does it decide like when to take and when not to, and what is it catching that you don't want to be photographed, and where does that photograph lie? All those questions, of course. But you know, this is an AI patrol border in Dubai. So you just walk through the airport looking at this beautiful virtual fish, but there's actually facial recognition systems making sure that you are the right person to walk through the border. So it's all getting hidden and inside the system in ways we don't understand, of course. And then there's Alexa, just ask it questions, and it spits back answers to you. So I've been speaking to Matt Jones, who is leading the AI and research group at Google, and he says, generally speaking, edge AI will get closer to our environment, more coordinated as a mesh, and more self-sufficient. So, you know, generally speaking, until recently, machines were predictable, more or less easily understood. That's the central definition of a machine, you might say. You build them to do X, Y, and Z, and that's what they do. A car built to do 0 to 60 in 4.2 seconds is not suddenly going to do 3.6 seconds under those same conditions. But these things are changing. Now it's more like prosthetics, embedded in ways inside our lives in which we still don't quite understand. So Now, machines are starting to be built that can think for themselves creatively and unpredictably. Some emergent nonlinear shift is going on. And humans are having a hard time figuring out not only what the machine is up to, but how it's even thinking about it, which strikes me as a relatively new development in our relationship. And so it's not at all hard to imagine in time an even smarter AlphaGo. You must have heard of the AlphaGo, which defeated this Lee Sedol in this game of Go, which till then nobody had heard of this game of Go, but suddenly everybody was talking about the game of Go. But anyway, so he's kind of, we can imagine this even smarter AlphaGo that can do more things: paint a picture, write a poem, prove a difficult mathematical conjuncture, negotiate peace, and do these things creatively and better than people. So you've probably also seen this painting made by an AI. It was sold for $432,000. It was created by Pierre Fautrel, Gauthier, and Gauthier Vernier. It used a two-part algorithm called a generative adversarial network to produce the work. The artist first fed the system a data set of 1,500 portraits painted between the 14th and the 20th centuries, and the generator portion of the algorithm then started creating the works. It kept churning them out until it fooled the discriminator portion of the algorithm, which was created to distinguish between man-made and machine-made works of art. So it kept on changing the man-made, machine-made, man-made, machine-made, till it couldn't distinguish anymore whether it was made by a man or a machine. So this new technology allows us to experiment on the notion of creativity for a machine and parallel with the role of the artist in the creation process. What does this mean for the future of design? I think about that a lot. Design can be, in a very broad sense, the creative industries, as we call in the UK. I teach a course, I run a design studio. What does this mean for the future of design? What does this mean for the future of designers? I think these are very important questions we need to really address today, because it's going to be the foundation of how we kind of set out the agenda for the next few decades. In my own practice, some glimpse of the projects we do, what we do at Superflux is we examine these complex challenges around exponential change and then challenge perspectives. So we go and show governments, cultural institutions, public sector, third sector organizations, that there are other possibilities, that exponential growth in technology does not mean we keep riding that wave. Let's ask bigger questions. Just show you a quick example. So there is this idea that one of the big things about these kind of smart technologies is they're always presented with this one very kind of classic use case. The elderly. Technology will solve all our problems for the elderly. The idea that you give elderly people these machines and these technologies, and then young people can just be happy, and we never have the time, but you can be now fine because you've given these smart devices that will monitor the health and well-being of the elderly, and we can look at it on our phone and make sure they are all right. So we wanted to question that paradigm. So we created this short fiction in which this is Thomas, around 70 years old. His 3 children who live far away gave him 3 smart devices that could monitor his well-being. A smart fork that makes sure that he eats healthy. A smart cane, walking cane, that makes sure he exercises. And a smart mattress that makes sure he gets enough rest. Thomas was not really keen on using them because they were interfering with his everyday rituals. So he didn't use these smart devices, went back to his whole habits. And obviously the kids, the adult children, did not receive the data about the usage. And so they started texting the father and saying, "What are you doing? Why are you not using these devices?" And so he came up with a hack to make sure that the children stay happy while he can still carry on with his life. And I'll show you a small clip from that film.
GMT. Cow in sea area Shan moving slowly eastwards and south. Sorry, that should be low in sea area Shan. And now the area reports.
Fish and chips.
Northward Sierra, southward Sierra, rain at times, good. westerly becoming cyclonic good. Humber, Thames, Bedford, Leyland, Douth, Dover, Seoul, Haight, Rain, Tyne, good. White, Portland, Plymouth.
Subway systems from around the world. Will you tell us in which city systems, please? Best of luck. Okay, let's reveal our 5 subway systems. We have got Bedford, Leading, Paris. New York City from Andy and Julian. 50. David and Rachel are going to say, is it going to be 15 though? We don't do that. 7. Very well done indeed. Too nice to make this so many films, isn't it? Now A is not.
Right, getting inside the telescope, the astronauts had to get the latch to lock.
If you copy, Jeff's just working, putting the doors back together and thinks he's managed to close the gap. And we're going to press on. If you've got a way to do it, do it.
Trap and a ratchet, floating Story Musgrave improvised a solution. It was a success. The
Anyway, so that was a project that we've been showing around for a while, but it's also part of actually become curriculum for healthcare professionals. But the point is that we can ask the technology to do certain things, but we do not take into account the embodied human, the way we work as humans with all our whims and our kind of complexities. And how do we kind of put that into a machine, you know? Another very quick example is a project we did around the future of work. So as you know, that this is a big topic, and the current trends on this side, or on that side, around automation, you know, jobs losses, huge sort of problems. On the other hand, you have the idea of the universal basic income, universal basic services, universal basic assets, and a lot more other things. We were working with policymakers and decision makers and heads of state who were about to design the curriculum, education for the future. Now, when you think about designing education, you're thinking about jobs. How do you design education so that the people, children who graduate will find jobs? And what will those jobs be? So we created this very immersive simulation. Basically, 15 people in one round had to go inside this space and did not know what to expect. And then they went in, they had their facial recognition done, their data scan, and here they are all being made redundant. So each of them had to experience what it would feel like to actually lose job. One thing is to talk about other people losing their jobs, and the second thing is to actually feel the impact of you losing your job yourself. What does that mean, and what does that feel like? We actually found people getting really uncomfortable because the atmosphere was quite sort of seductive, and then they were taken through this very dark space. A guy said, okay, how do we help you find the job? And they were taken into this gig economy where an artificial intelligence automated system would try and give them a job that they had to then do, which turned out to be one of the most popular jobs was the job of cleaning Uber smart self-driving cars. So basically, one of the big jobs in the future will be something that requires human dexterity, which is very difficult to design a robot that will clean carefully a car. It wasn't nice. They were shoved into this cage, and that was one future, very dystopic. But then, on the other side, they were shown other possibilities. Automation does not have to be job losses. Automation and technological acceleration can be used for positive good. We have so many challenges as humans. It does not have to be at the expense of losing our own jobs. And then they were taken through this kind of film. I'm only going to show you the last kind of clip of it, but they were really, it's not actually very loud, but doesn't matter. They were actually just provoked very deeply to consider the choices and the decisions they are making today around automation, essentially, and education. And then they had to come out and they had to plot their own feedback on what power and influence they have in shaping the future of education and the future of work. So all of these kind of provocations and this research has that is going on is becoming very clear that on one side we will be able to build general AI. So right now we have very narrow AI, we will be able to build general AI, but that does not mean it will be human intelligence. So cognitively, aesthetically, functionally, intellectually, emotionally, and tangibly, what does that mean? Currently, in our visions of how humans interact with computers and varieties of AI, our benchmark of what we want our machines to behave like keeps coming back to a peculiar notion of human intelligence. We build machines with narrowly human properties, skills, and behaviors. Chess players, Go players, conversational agents, car drivers, robots that look and act like humans. My friend and colleague, sociologist, Microsoft Research says, we've been doing this because that's the only way we seem to act and think, that we can only mirror humans. The human bias comes in. And what he says is that our clunky ideas of human intelligence, smartness, emotion, and so on are things we are so deeply invested in, intellectually and culturally, that they distract us from far more promising possibilities around the idea of intelligence. It does not have to be human. And so I want to talk about the idea of the centaur revolution. You know the story of Garry Kasparov in 1996 was defeated by IBM's Deep Blue. In 1998, Garry Kasparov then held the world's first game of centaur chess. Similar to how the mythical centaur was half human and half horse, these centaurs were teams that were half human and half AI. So the human plus AI, and the plus is really important, this becomes intelligence not with a single dimension, but more than just one kind of dimension. So the old story of AI is about human brains working against machine brains or silicon brains. The new story of IA, so intelligence augmented, will be about human brains working with silicon brains. And it's the opposite of the chess, because it's a zero-sum game. Both players will win. And this has because the research currently being shown is that AIs are best at choosing answers, but humans are best at choosing questions. And actually, there's enough research to say that the more we go through schools, the less we are able to ask questions, that our education system is removing the ability to ask questions because we are fundamentally trained from a very young age to only answer questions, solve problems. And so I believe that a big role of designers today and in the future is going to be about designing questions, that designers can design questions. Artists, technologists, writers, all of us. And it is these questions that are going to show us possibilities of a future that we have not yet imagined. And this is what I try and do with my students in our department at ID2 and Design Investigations, that we are constantly helping the students understand these complexities, understand that we must live with this uncertainty, and to be able to design with and for this uncertainty in a most productive and transformative way. For instance, this is a project by Stephanie and Max, and the question was, how can we confuse algorithms and obfuscate our identities? And so they created these machines that had human behavior, tweeting and liking and doing these activities on social media, but instead of us, the machines were doing it. And so what does that tell us about our own addictive behavior as well? This is a project that was done by Johanna Pickelbauer called The Critical Cariatids. And she was saying, what does objectivity in machines look like? What if machines were not just making decisions, but judging humans? And so she actually used the music we're in, this grand space, and she gave all the cariatids, the stone sculptures, a machine intelligence. So each of the cariatids would look at the performance and judge the performance. And it was then shown to the people who were playing the music, whether that would change their own performance. And it's a fascinating experiment to understand this kind of idea of algorithmic objectivity, that there is no such thing as algorithmic objectivity. So these are all the different characters, and they all measure different aspects of the music performance. It's a beautiful piece, but I'm going to not show all of it, obviously. Another project that Daniel Subochnik did, which was how can everyone experience the overview effect? Not something that machines can help us do. So literally, how would all of us feel to be traveling into space? And that whole experience of going about and looking at the world below, created through design and through asking these questions. And so really, what we are trying to do is not compete with machines, but extend our own human capacities to be more than human, to be different human. Here's one of the students, Felix, trying to understand what it means to be a tree. Being rooted to the ground and standing for hours in that position. What does it mean, actually? What if we imagine that AI, artificial intelligence, extends our capabilities, not replace us? Sorry. I'm really into octopuses for a good reason. This is a really fantastic book by Peter Godfrey Smith called Other Minds, the Octopus, the Sea, and the Deep Origins of Consciousness. Essentially, this message is clear. Different minds, different animals have different minds. So thinking about being informed by other forms of intelligence rather than what we are told culturally in society today. Because when we try to compare one animal's brain power with another, we also run the problem that there is no single scale on which intelligence can be sensibly measured. We know, it's a known fact that the octopus's intelligence is distributed in all its arms. And its arms can make decisions, arms, limbs, I don't know what you call it, independent of its brain. They have not even collected the majority of the neurons of their brain yet. And the book has some really fascinating things, like when you dive into the sea, you are diving into the origin of us all. And it's really interesting to start thinking in other ways about intelligence. And then, of course, jellyfish as well. Obviously, I'm into cephalopods. So the Australian marine biologist, Leisha Ann Gershon, researches jellyfish a lot and says it's fascinating. Global warming is causing our oceans to kind of get destroyed, all the life in our oceans, except for jellyfish. They are thriving in the pollution. And that's because they can squeeze their boneless bodies through impossibly tiny openings or join their expanded bells to cover vast stretches of ocean. And so they are actually more likely to survive than us as humans. And that's already telling that we need to catch up with the jellyfish. What we need are the conditions to actively produce something in common, to bit by bit resulting in shared perspectives, intelligences, and intentions, resemblances, inversions, and exchanges of properties. Complex, but really important. And I think that's important because the tools we are creating to master the world are remastering us. And so we are going to have to start thinking about what we can do to create a whole new set of languages and a new set of tools. And for me, that's possibility space. And that's what I want to leave you with, thinking about this new possibility space. Thank you.